Hello. Um, Forgive me before I start if the quality of this recording is not quite as good as it might be, but I'm having to use my really rather battered old phone, so rather than my wife's because she's at work. And it's just me today rather than Claire because she's got a full-time job, so the quality of the content might not be that good either. So this week we're exploring further the idea of Jesus as a healer. And I wanted to update you on some of the things we were talking about in our Lent group and share some of those thoughts with you. Healing is actually a very complex idea. What is it that you need to be healed from? Sometimes the answer is really obvious. Someone who is blind might appreciate being able to see. Someone who is paralyzed would obviously appreciate being able to walk again. Huge amounts of effort and time and money and research are given to those things, along with trying to cure life-limiting illnesses such as MS or cancer. But what is something that you need healing from? What counts as a disability or an illness? Defining that is really important because it says something about how we are as people. It's really hard to define the word itself. Disability doesn't actually help. It just means a lack of ability. But to my mind, a disability is something that prevents you from having as full a liberty as other people might have. So is dyslexia a disability? Is having a volatile personality a disability? Because that can prevent you doing lots of things. Those things make it harder for you to get on in a world uh, where people might react negatively to those things. In fact, if a disability is something that prevents you as having full autonomy over your own life, is being a woman a disability in a anti-women world? In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, so he doesn't have a disability in that place. So disability is an interaction between our physicality and our society. I have very poor eyesight, but I have glasses, therefore, to all intents and purposes, I have no disability. But my mum struggles to walk in a world which seems, when you're with her, to be largely made of stairs, and that can be difficult. I mentioned in a sermon not long ago that some of the great saints that we venerate displayed some what we might define as mental health disabilities, which we might try and medicate, such as St. Paul, who to my mind was bipolar. St. Francis behaved in ways that were certainly not normal, such as rolling in nettles to reduce his thoughts about Clare of Assisi. St. Nicholas of Myra punched a fellow bishop during the Council of Nicaea and dropped bags of gold down chimneys. If a loved one of ours displayed these characteristics, we wouldn't think they had a spiritual gift. We would try and treat them. But they lived in a world where that wasn't a disability, it was a gift. I guess subconsciously we have a model of good health, which is quite demanding, which is why it's really important that we make it not subconscious but conscious. Perhaps it's due to the Industrial Revolution and the rise of machines, but we have an attitude towards our bodies, and minds, which is quite mechanistic. As though our bodies are machines that should work perfectly, and if they don't, we need to fix them until they do. It's a false narrative, clearly, when we think about it. It's not biology and it's not human nature. But sometimes our subconscious desires are projected into the world, and we reward people who look like they are perfect physical specimens of humanity, even if they're not the sort of people we would want our children to marry. So if disability is an interaction between our bodies and the world in which we live, sometimes it's a question of working out which of those two things need healing. Because it's very easy to say that a person is broken or deficient, much easier than saying that a society is broken or deficient. When John Knox wrote his first blast of the trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women, to update the language, he said that he meant the unnatural rule of women. He was complaining about Mary of Guise and Mary Queen of Scots, blaming them for all the ills of society in which he lived and identifying them as the problem because they were women. And we see that process writ large in every tribe and every society and every culture in the history and today. Not just about women, of course, but just the process of pointing to a person or a group of people and saying they are the problem, because it's easier to call a person or a group of people ill than it is to call a society ill. In Jesus' day, to be ill or sick or disabled for various reasons meant to be outside society, partly because that society wasn't set up for people who were disabled, partly because sickness was something to be afraid of, and so people separated those who were ill for fear of infection. But over time, it became a moral thing too. People who suffered misfortune or behaved differently were treated as though they were ill-favored by God. And this is where Jesus as the healer comes into a very powerful way, because he heal people of their diseases, but there are three characteristics of the healing stories in the Gospels that I want to highlight, and they're not in all of them, but they're very common. Firstly, Jesus always forgives people their sins. In fact, one miracle, Jesus only heals the person with their disability out of anger when people told him you shouldn't be forgiving sins on the Sabbath. I love that bit of petulance in Jesus. Says, "Oh, I'm not allowed to do that, am I? Oh, well, how about this then?" And he healed the man. So he forgives sins, and doing that publicly brings those people into a closeness with God and into a closeness with the society around them. People who were unclean can now be touched and held close by their loved ones. People who are cast out are brought in. Jesus often touches them in order to do it, making himself ritually unclean in the process. He becomes unclean with them in order to show the world that they are now clean. Secondly, Jesus often says, "Your faith has healed you," as though it's not his actions, but their belief which has caused their restoration. He's saying to the people around them, not only is this person now restored to the society, but because of their belief, their faith, they have brought this about. Almost saying that these people are strong in faith. And finally, he says, "Go in peace." And that phrase goes back a long way. My favorite use of it is another healing miracle, but this time in the Old Testament. Naaman, commander of the army of Aram. Naaman developed leprosy, and it couldn't be healed by anybody in his own land, so he went to Elisha, the Jewish prophet, and asked him what he needed to do to be made clean. And Elisha just said, "Oh, go wash in the lake 7 times, you'll be fine." And Naaman was expecting a quest, a trial of strength or will, and he was honestly a bit cheesed off. He said, "I'm not going to do this. You know, what's this river compared with all the rivers in my land?" And eventually his people had to say, "Look, if he told you to do a really difficult thing like wrestle a bear, you'd do it. So why not just wash in the lake?" So reluctantly Naaman did it, and he was healed. And Naaman went back to Elisha to say that he knew that there was only one God, not many, and the true God was the God of Elisha. But then Naaman said, "When I go home, I will have to be at the right hand of the king, and when he bows to the gods, I will have to bow to them too. What should I do?" Now, Elisha at this point could have said, "Aha, the false gods before them, bow before them and your leprosy will return." Or he could have said, "Now that you know the truth, you have to live by it, you know?" But what he said was, "Go in peace. Live the life you can live according to the truth that you know." When Elisha said to him, "Go in peace," it was bestowing a grace upon him, enabling him to live with God overshadowing him like a shelter, living with integrity in a world which is often not very authentic. In many of Jesus' stories, it is hard to tell who is the more healed, the person or the world. But the peace of God, which is given to all of us broken people, is there to try and help us lead authentic lives in a world of inauthenticity and falseness. We are constantly in need of healing and forgiveness, as is the world around us. And there is no perfect standard to which we can aspire other than the truth of who we, and only we, truly are. And we can only find that out, in my experience, in the presence of a God who loves us for who we are, despite how we sometimes behave.